Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Secure AF podcast, the podcast about all things cybersecurity. My name's Todd Wadle. I'm our Director of Communications here, and with me is Jonathan Kimmett, our CISO. And given that it's the new year, and as most people do, you have New Year's resolutions, we thought it would be helpful to think about what would New Year's resolutions be for the cybersecurity industry? What are things that you should think about doing or not doing as we start the new year so that you can be cyber secure for 2025? So, Jonathan, why don't you kick us off? What are some of the things on the top of your list?
Well, okay, so I'm going to make this qualification because most people who do New Year's resolutions, it lasts for about a week and it just stops. You can't do that in cybersecurity.
Well, you can. It just doesn't go well.
You can do that, but you're going to be paying for incident response later in the year. So thinking about, for me, thinking about for my clients and thinking about for the stuff that I'm seeing out in the world, I've put a fair amount of thought into this because every year, at the end of the year, we talk about what were the things that happened and the types of attacks, the news articles, the different breaches or whatever. So at the beginning of the year, you say, okay, well, what are we going to have to think about for this year? And I always go back to the things that, well, what happened last year and how do you get better prepared for it? So I have a list of things. AI, of course, is on, everybody's tongue. Everybody's talking. I mean, it is the 2024, 2025 version of blockchain from a couple years ago. Everybody was talking about blockchain. The thing about AI is it's here. At least this version of AI, narrow intelligence AI, it's not going away. It's been here for a while, and people use it. People need to understand what it is. I still have users who are clients who they just want to stop it. They want to block it entirely. And there's just no way of doing that. It's too ingrained in so many different processes, whether it be your GPS on your car, your voice recognition, your voice to text. I mean, there's ChatGPT, of course, everyone's loving, Copilot. I mean, there's so many different ones. But here's the reality. There has been a version of AI in most endpoint protection for the last 10 years. Maybe not the very traditional antivirus stuff, but just above what used to be antivirus, signature-based antivirus. There's this form of AI in there, heuristics and analysis and things. So,
I mean, it's running algorithms. It's making determinations based upon that. Is this worthy of an alert? Is it not? How severe is the alert?
It's statistical analysis.
Right. Which is what LLMs are, is statistical probability.
Absolutely. So we can't get rid of it. We're not going to get rid of it. And here's the reality. It's actually a useful tool. I mean, it can be very useful with some qualifications. I mean, you've got to understand how AI is used in your organization and the protections you have to put into place. I mean, and there are a few. Number one, I would say you have to teach people about AI. Let them understand it. Don't be afraid of it. It's just another tool. I use this a lot. It's a more efficient search browser.
Yeah,
for a lot of things. ChatGPT as an example. If I could go out and find all that information out on the internet right now.
It's kind of in a lot of ways, you can use it as a personally curated Wikipedia.
Yeah.
I want to know about this with these constraints in this link.
Yep.
And get certain information.
And you should trust it about as much as Wikipedia. It's probably good information. Somebody probably knew what they were talking about when they put it on there, but you need to have a healthy respect for it. So AI is probably one of those big ones that, we've been hearing about it for years now. It's really kind of mainstream. Everybody is using it. I mean, they have toilet seats with AI in them now. I mean, it's a brand. It's AI to sell something. So as an organization, we have to understand what kind of risks that AI plays into the organization and how it's relevant to the business functions. And also how do we need to make sure that anything that's new that comes into the organization, we wrap security around. And that's awareness, and that's a variety of things. Now, going on to number 2, I know you didn't ask me for number 2 yet, but I'm going to go right into it because it plays into it. So when we're talking about AI, there's a whole host of new AI tools out there that do deep fakes, pictures, voice, all these things. In fact, last year I had I did a panel where it was me and a fake Jonathan. We've talked about that before. But I had fake Jonathan. It was a picture of me and an AI-generated voice that was my voice. And we did a panel with 2 other people. So it was me, fake Jonathan, 2 other people, and a moderator. And it was for fun, and people had a good time with it, all these different things. But it's real. Mm-hmm. So the second thing that we really have to think about this year that I think we should have thought about it last year more, but no one did, and that's a very different way of identifying people. Because AI is making it so much easier to mimic or fake someone's voice, even the way they write or how they do things. When we're dealing with security in an organization, a lot of time it comes into identifying someone to give them authorization to do something. A perfect example is getting access to your bank accounts. If you have a bank who just uses voice recognition, so somebody on the other line is like, oh yeah, I know what Jonathan sounds like. Well, they probably shouldn't be doing that sort of identification anymore because I can fake a voice.
Right.
So the number 2 in there is really changing the way you think about identifying individuals. We have information that's out there, so you might not be able to identify them with, oh, well, give me your date of birth, your social security number, which you should not be doing right now. But that's how people have traditionally done it. Well, now it's, is it that person who's talking on the end of the phone? You can't guarantee that that's really them. I mean, think about it. I mean, I grew up in the Cold War era. So having, if you guys remember, for those old enough to know this, but the overlay cups that you used to put on phones to change your voice. Mm-hmm. And when we're doing like Mission Impossible or a James Bond or something like that, they would change their voice to listen to be someone else. That's possible now.
Yeah.
I mean, it was possible back then, but now it's really possible. You could take someone's voice recording that they leave you a voice on your cell phone, train an AI to sound just like that, and then use that to go leave messages.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, think about it like this.
Well, and there are podcast platforms that are doing that will allow you to record enough of your voice so that you can go back in and without re-recording anything, add language in, make corrections, and the AI just populates it with your voice, with your same inflections, pauses, all those sorts of things. So it's a great tool in that sense.
It is. But, so let's say I want to just really mess with someone. I record their voice or I get their recording. I call into their boss as them and I quit. I just say, screw you, boss. I'm not coming in tomorrow. And now it causes a whole bunch of ruckus because that boss knew that was that person.
Yep.
They's like, I heard them. That you know what? Can you imagine what they said to me? But it was all a fake. So think about swatting nowadays, or the old days of swatting. Now somebody's going to be calling in as someone else and quitting. Or there's a whole variety of things. Can you imagine? Think about all the chaos it would cause if someone records someone, gets an AI voice, and then calls and tells their significant other they want a divorce.
Yeah.
I mean, think about that. And most people are going like, I probably never thought about that before. But let's say I just want to cause a problem. I just want to be malicious. What could I do with AI to do that? And it's here. You can do it. So with that said, you have to really think about, how do you identify someone? How do you verify their identity to make sure you're really dealing with that real person and not an AI generated? And here's the other thing. It's not limited to, and I hate to say it, important people. And what I mean by that is a lot of people will say, well, I'm not important. No one would ever do that to me. Yes, they would. They're going to try to take your retirement. They're going to try to take your accounts. They're going to try to convince someone to reset a password for you. So if I want to get into an organization, and I want passwords to be able to do that, I might go find someone who I might think is forgetful. Maybe they're a little older. Maybe they're part-time, whatever. I'm going to call up the help desk. And I'm going to say, I've forgotten my phone. I don't have my multi-factor. I'm trying to get into work. And I'm doing it as their voice. Now, how can I get their voice? I call them. I call them and social engineer them.
Well, or, we're on a podcast.
Yes.
It goes on the internet, and somebody could take our recordings and given how much you and I have podcasted,
absolutely,
there's a wealth.
Really, really low from now on.
We're actually going to get those buffers over the mic so that we don't sound anything like ourselves. That would be really great.
We need to do a podcast where we did
alternate voice. Oh, we should totally do that. Maybe I'll do that for a section of this.
That would be kind of fun.
Yeah. Well, and I think about, the variety of ways that could be used. I think about, when we go and we're hired to go break into an organization or a company to kind of test their security. Well, what if we were given authorization to mimic the CEO's voice? So our guys go in the front door, they have a pretext, we're here to do XYZ. Person's like, I don't know, that doesn't sound right. And they get a call from the CEO that says, oh yeah, these guys are approved, they can go wherever they want. Well, now they have full access, and the person thinks that they did their due diligence. They checked, they had a phone call or a voicemail from the CEO, and it was just all spoofed.
Yeah.
So how do you verify that? Because that seems like a verification.
It is, and that's verification up the line, not down the line.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of people that's going to be really comfortable calling a CEO saying, hey, did you really? Call? Yeah, did you just call and leave me a message? So, identity is going to be, I think, with the new parts of AI, the new tools that are available, is identification of individuals is going to be critically important because of issues like that, or all the things that we've talked about. It's going to be such a huge threat vector in the organization, and honestly, it's easy. I'll tell you the fake Jonathan thing. So we were doing a thing on AI, and people were really excited about it. And we were having a good time. And the moderator calls me up one day and she goes, Jonathan, the person that was going to do it can't do it anymore. Can you do it? It's tomorrow. And of course, I'm crazy. And I was like,
sure,
maybe not. Sure. So in a few hours, I figured out how to clone my voice, record my voice on the questions, do all the thing, have it begin to generate it. And then, of course, I had to figure out how to be on the podcast in two different ways, myself in a regular and myself in a hoodie, a black hoodie as a hacker, and then on the computer. So I had two different things, but I figured it out in a couple of hours. This is not difficult. Think about an attacker who has weeks to plan for an attack. This is kind of scary. My wife and I have been watching a TV show. It's a slightly older one, but it's called White Collar. I don't know if you've ever watched it.
I've seen a little bit, yeah.
And the things that he does, there's law enforcement, or there's FBI, and then there's an ex-convict, and they're partnering together and whatever. And I'm thinking, it's like, now, if this was made now, if that person now had the tools we had, a lot of his antics would be so much easier. It'd be done a different way, and it would be so successful. It's really scary. I think it's 15 years old or something like that. I don't remember now. But to think about, if I wanted to do the things that convict did, now I have so many tools available to me on the internet to let me do that.
Well, and you think about with phishing, you can do the same thing with written samples. Feed them into the LLM, give them enough of those samples, and you can generate an email, a memo, an entire, long piece of writing that sounds like and has all the markers of that person that you're trying to impersonate. So phone gets hard, so there's something like electronic communication. That gets difficult because you say, well, that actually does. I hold up original email from the CEO. and this phishing email, and gee, they actually read the same. It's not just, oh, I can tell this isn't this person. No, all the language markers are there.
Yeah. So I was watching this video. It was a short or something on YouTube the other day, and it was an interview. It was a remote interview, so they were doing it on Zoom. And the guy on the screen, the interviewer, was saying, well, I want to see your desktop right now. And so the guy says, okay, share desktop. And showed the desktop. And, of course, there's a camera, showing him. He shared the desktop. There's nothing on the desktop in terms of applications. And he goes, okay, well, I just wanted to make sure. Then he asked him an interview question. The camera, the webcam, what we used to call webcams, the camera was sitting here on top of his phone that had the AI listening to the question, and then it answered it, so he just read it off the phone. And if you move the camera around, you're never going to see that thing. So you've got people who are, it's a very clever way of doing it, but you've got people who are using AI to answer interview questions.
Yes.
And again, it's an identity issue. How do you identify that person really is that person who's answering the thing without those extra tools? It's cheating. Now, I'll give the guy props. So it was funny, and, it's like, oh, yeah, but think about all of those remote tests that you do, whether it be for a certification or whatever, and you do that. And they would never know. You can, and it's going to change. It'll change. People will start doing that, and they'll figure out ways to change it and modify. But eventually, they're going to say, "Well, we just don't trust it. You're going to have to come in. You have to sit in a room."
Yeah, I think that's going to force a lot of that person-to-person interaction. That's a big change or big questions going on in education, and I think you're seeing it in hiring too. Well, it seems like we're going to have to move more towards in-person. Probably more oral or interactive exams.
Yeah.
Because you could be in person, but you're still sitting at your computer, and guess what? You can still use all the tools.
Well, we'll take it a little bit further. What if I wanted to do it in person, and I have an earbud?
Yeah, there you go.
And it's listening and then relaying it to me, and then I'm speaking it. Or let's say it's
we just need lots of large Faraday cages for every building. That's what I'm hearing.
Well, it's an arms race.
Right.
But it all comes down to, how do you actually identify that the person you're talking to really is them, that they are the ones answering it, that they're the ones that have access to it. So it's going to change. And I'll tell you, very low-tech ways of doing this are kind of still the best ways.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, that's my number 2.
If you're terrified already, that's great. We've just got a few more to go through.
Yeah. Just a handful more. I would say, kind of next on my list is, this is a big one for me because it's really important to me, and that's third-party risks.
Mm-hmm.
So many organizations are getting hit through third parties, or really more the impactful, the third-party the third-party vendor organization is getting hit, and it's hurting the organization. I had a client who their third-party vendor got hacked. They shut down. My client locked them down, locked the connection, thankfully. But because the vendor was the one attacked, they were down for weeks, which affected my client. They couldn't do anything as it relates to what that service was provided. And it hurt them. It cost them a fair amount. It was not this or my client's organization. They had nothing to, there was nothing they could do. Now, we went back to the contract, and there were some contractual things that weren't right, and we had to figure all that out. So you have to make sure that your contract has an SLA and make sure it has security requirements that they're going to let you know, and they're going to do all these things, cyber insurance, whatever. But it doesn't matter when they're down. They are down for weeks. That means that your organization doesn't have that service for weeks. So even though it hasn't affected you directly, it's affecting you indirectly, but it's affecting primary functions. you have to initiate probably definitely your business continuity plan, and then probably your disaster recovery plan. How do you recover from the fact that the third party is now down and you can't provide those services? So that's huge. And third party management, ever since I started teaching contracts years ago, has always been a big issue. But I think now people are truly seeing the effect of, it's not me that got hacked, it's them, but I am down because of it.
And if you've never had the opportunity, Jonathan does a fantastic job teaching contracts, and especially third-party vendor contracts. And I've actually seen him do this with people where he'll sit down and say, okay, well, here's a contract. And everybody says, yeah, sure, it's good. And then he has them go through and, oh, well, what if this happens? And they start redlining and it gets very serious. And then he'll say, okay, you need to go do this with all the contracts of your third party. And people realize that sometimes the third-party vendors don't have good security controls, or it's not contractually, it is not in the contract that they have to have that.
Yeah.
And you said that then can become potentially like legal liability for that company because they have to hold the standard. They have a third-party vendor who doesn't hold that standard, but it's still you who's responsible.
And things like hospitals that have BAAs, or there's a lot of different kinds of ways to make that happen. But as the controller of data or the controller of a function or a service, my job is to make sure that I control everything that happens to my customers. And if I have a processor on the other side, a third-party vendor, and they are not fulfilling the requirement, I am still liable to my customers.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a perfect example. Let's say that you are an ambulance, you're a emergency medical provider, so you provide emergency services. And your third-party vendor is a vendor that provides you parts for your ambulances. Third-party vendor goes down, they can't get you parts, your ambulances go down, you cannot provide services. Wasn't your fault. It was a third-party vendor. But now what do? Do you go to another third-party vendor? Do you have the money for that? Can you do that? Sometimes you get these contracts that doesn't let you go to another vendor. So, I mean, you have all these things you got to think about. I mean, and that's kind of an odd one, and that's maybe not something that we would deal with in cybersecurity, but that is from a critical function point of view, that's a really good, analogy or whatever it is to say, okay, you can't do this thing anymore because of this vendor. Now you're dead in the water. How do you continue to function? How do you provide services? Your customers, God forbid, you can't go because you can't get an alternator for your ambulance, and someone is called and they die because you didn't get the ambulance there, because you didn't get the alternator. Well, who's liable for that? Is it the vendor? Is it you? I mean, there's all these pieces and you really want that liability managed in the contract. You want to make sure all those pieces are there. But, if something like that happens, that's the analysis you have to do. All right, who's liable? Who is going to take this on their shoulders and deal with it? Well, the reality is the controller will always have to deal with it. Doesn't matter what the vendors do. I mean, you are the one that the customers are going to be coming after and suing and possibly criminal charges, whatever it may be. But if you don't do that, then, you have to do that. That's the thing. If you don't, you will get sued. You will get fines. Regardless of your vendors. But I had a client not too long ago. I was talking about this earlier. They, if their system goes down, they're not allowed to go buy new systems. Like, let's say all the computers get ransomware. All the computers are now ransomware. They're dead in the water. They can't do anything. So it's like, okay, well, what do you have so you can go and buy new computers? Go get a contract with Dell to go buy a whole bunch, credit card, pro card, whatever. It's like, no, we can't do that. That's illegal. What? It's like, what do you mean? During an incident response, that's illegal. He goes, yes, that is illegal. And I had long conversations with the lawyer at that time. He says, no, the way it works in this organization, it's a city government type thing, that part would be illegal for them to do. There's this whole process yet. It's like, so you have to plan for everything being down for several days to get the approvals. He goes, yes.
Oh my gosh.
It's like, well, that needs to be in your incident response, your business continuity, your disaster recovery. Everyone needs to be trained on that. You need to have whatever you need to do to make sure you can provide critical functions in that meantime. And that's really scary.
Yeah.
So third-party management it's not going away. It will always be here. But what needs to happen is people need to really focus on what are you doing to protect your organization if your third-party vendor has a problem. And they are having problems. I've got an email in my phone right now that a client's third-party vendor got hacked. It didn't affect them that we know about, but it was the vendor that got hacked. So now we have to go through a process of incident response to figure out, okay, how is this going to affect us? Will it affect us? And it may not, except for the fact they may have to shut their systems down for hours or days or weeks or whatever. And that will absolutely affect my client.
Mm-hmm.
So again, third-party management is huge. And that is something that people, I think this year for sure, will have to start paying attention to.
Well, and maybe to connect the two, to connect your first point and this third point, I know because LLMs are so good, it's tempting, and people do use them to write contracts.
Yes,
they use them to, and I teach a course for communications for engineers, and what I tell them is, again, it's a tool.
Absolutely,
it's a fantastic tool.
Absolutely, and I use it.
But as engineers, and this is actually from what I've read, this is actually becoming a conversations in engineering professional organizations. You are responsible for what you produce. So when you say the weight bearing limit of this bridge is X, that's you. It doesn't matter where that came from. If you say that certain things can happen in a contract, okay, well, one, that person is responsible for that contract, but two, then that actually means you probably need to read contracts more carefully.
Yes.
You should have already been reading them carefully.
Yes.
But maybe even more carefully, because if somebody says, well, I need a contract, I'm a third-party vendor, I have a small company, I don't have a lot of HR folks, here's a contract, sends it your way, and you're like, oh, well, yeah, this looks professional, because it will, right? LLMs are good.
Yeah.
Well, it's your responsibility now to make sure that contract actually has everything that you need.
Right.
And so I could see that being a problem.
There is still a skill set.
Yeah.
I think about that story. There's a friend of mine who's a lawyer was telling me a story about a guy he knew. And this guy dealt with a very unique piece of law. So if you didn't know, lawyers, they get into certain kinds of law, things that they are interested in or they're really good at. Yes, some that are litigators, some of them are contract law, whatever it may be. And he was in this very obscure obscure law or legal whatever. And there's like 4 people in the world that does this type of law. He gets paid very well, because he's the only one that does it. Or, there's only a handful. So he gets called up one day by a colleague and says, hey, just FYI, we don't need you anymore. And I'm sure the conversation was a little different, but that's effectively what he
Hopefully.
said. Yeah, he says, we don't need you anymore. I went out to ChatGPT and I had it write all the stuff that I needed for. And the guy who is the expert in this law is like, really? Okay, well, would you mind sharing that with me? I mean, would you be willing to do that? It says, absolutely. And the guy's reading through this, and I don't know what it was. I know the outcome of the story, but it was effectively, it was writing a precedent or something. It was writing this document that was talking about this court case, and this is what happened, and this. And the guy was reading through it, and he goes, there's only 4 of us in the world, or however many there were. I have no idea how many there were, but I would know if this court case, what happened in this court case.
Yeah.
And it turns out ChatGPT made it up. He made it up, or ChatGPT made up the court case to defend the premise of what the guy was asking. And here's the problem. The more you're using an LLM, the more you have to modify your prompts.
Yep.
And this person modified the prompt in such a way that that ChatGPT wrote content to match the prompt.
Mm-hmm.
And so it gave him exactly what he asked for. But he did it, ChatGPT did it by creating all these things that don't exist. And so the lawyer who was the specialist called him and was like, hey, FYI, don't do this. This is a bad idea. And I have seen the same thing. Now, I use LLMs for a variety of things. I might just rewrite a sentence or give me a different word, or I might create a script with it, a PowerShell script or a Bash Shell script. But whatever I get, I am very critical of it. And I read through it. I make sure that it does what I could write it myself. I just need the efficiency. But you go through there and you evaluate. Is it actually doing what it's supposed to be doing? Are there any catches in it? Are there any problems in it? Because if there are, again, like you said, you're going to be liable for that. And you got to be really, really careful. The other thing you keep in mind is stuff that's generated with an LLM is coming from somewhere.
Yeah.
It could absolutely be copyrighted.
Yep.
And if you take that and put it out there, for whatever, if you don't know where it came from and you didn't generate it, you're liable for it, but you could also be violating copyright and not know it.
Mm-hmm.
And it hasn't, to my knowledge, it hasn't hit the courts yet, but I would expect it will. And someone will come up and say, hey, this content that you put on your website, I actually wrote that 2 years ago on my website. You need to pay us X amount of money. And, I don't think the argument of, well, I just got it from ChatGPT is going to fly. So that's that. I think those are huge issues. I think that's stuff that people really needed to consider when they're using these tools.
Well, and also to realize if it's an open platform, if it's one of the open platforms, whatever you put in now becomes a part of what is commonly known. Yeah. So, I know one of the things that we've talked about is what do you put in that might be proprietary?
Yeah.
And I was actually looking at, AIs and everything. So I was looking at a marketing software. Actually, it's a real platform we already use. And so it's an AI that it'll generate content. Again, great tool. But there was the very clear qualification that whatever information you put in is shared with OpenAI because that's, the LLM that underwrites it or, underlays the platform. So they very clearly say, don't put anything proprietary in. Well, but if somebody's not paying attention and it's a platform that already has, right, because it's a block, but how many of us actually read every single warning? I know you do. Every single warning block that you see, it'd be easy to skip past that if it's a platform that already has client information, HIPAA, PII, and you didn't read that. That is not an excuse.
Yes.
The defense is not, well, I didn't know. Well, one, that platform's going to come back and say, well, you read the alert box.
Yeah.
And two, even if they didn't, you're still the one who put the information in to what was not a secure environment.
So here's a really good one that I think this kind of goes to third-party vendors. It goes to AI. Worked with a client that they had bought a new tool. Now this client is a hospital. And if you're a hospital, if you're getting a new tool that otherwise deals with patient information or patient treatment information, you have to get what's called a business associates agreement. It's a BAA to be HIPAA compliant. And you get this if a vendor has access to patient treatment or patient data of any kind, then they've got to follow the same rules that the organization does. Again, controller and processor, but in HIPAA world, it's the controller and then your third-party vendor or the BAA that manages that agreement. So they got a new tool that was going to analyze some data, and some of this data was log data. And the log data actually did have HIPAA data in it. And it was very obscure HIPAA data. Most people don't even think of it as HIPAA data, but it was. And once you get into it, you go, oh, yeah, that's an issue. But this vendor was using AI. And so they were doing due diligence, the hospital was, and they're saying, okay, well, we need a BAA. And the vendor gave them a BAA. Well, I found out about it. It's like, oh, okay, well, hold on. What are they using on their AI? And they go, oh, well, they're using ChatGPT on the AI. It's like, ChatGPT doesn't give you a BAA. There's only one small service that they provide a BAA for. And it was not the service that they use. And they're like, well, what do you mean? It's like, well, the vendor, if you get a BAA with the vendor, it has to be for the tools that you're going to use from that vendor. And they have a sub-processor, a sub-vendor, ChatGPT, that will not give them a BAA or give you a BAA, so you can't use that tool. And again, this gets into a lot of contractual and BAA and all these different things. But it's really critical because if something were to happen and ChatGPT says, we don't give a BAA, so it's not our fault that the data was lost. But then the company was saying, well, we got a BAA with the vendor. The vendor says, well, we gave you a BAA for our critical or our regular services, but we didn't give it to you for this. Who's liable? Who is going? I will tell you this, doesn't matter who's going to be liable. The people that are harmed are going to sue. Yeah. And OCR is going to come in and fine. And they're going to do all these different things. So, but if no one had asked that question, literally reading all the pieces all the way down to the sub-processor of a sub-processor of a sub, then you would have never caught that. And that's really scary because a lot of AIs right now cannot and will not do some of the things we do in terms of privacy, BAAs, or there's a whole variety of stuff in terms of protecting the data and things, or all the requirements. So that's something that's really scary. So again, we kind of go back to AI. We go back to identification. We go back to third-party management, and we're not even halfway through the list.
So I know we're only halfway through, maybe not even halfway through Jonathan's list. So we're going to make this a part 1 and a part 2. So this has been a great conversation, great starter. Hopefully there was some darker moments, but some lighter moments as well. And we will continue this the next time and get through the rest of Jonathan's list of things to be thinking about and hopefully committing to for 2025 so that it can be a great year. So thank you all, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.